What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. I'd like to do something a little different today. With the release of the Justice League Snyder Cut, we finally got to see the vision of original director Zack Snyder come to life after much studio interference. But let's talk about some other superhero movies where we didn't get to see a director's vision enacted because the film never even made it into production. Because especially before franchises like Fox's X-Men, the Dark Knight trilogy, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe helped popularize the superhero genre, it wasn't so easy getting these sort of projects off the ground, even when someone big was attached to write and direct. Now, some of these failed projects are pretty widely known, and some maybe not so much. So let's discuss what some of them were, who was attached, and how they ultimately fell through. And while there are tons of these movies that never saw the light of day, these are just the 10 I was most interested in seeing. So before we begin, let me know in the comments which superhero movies you'd love to see happen, whether it be projects that were in the works and fell through, dream pairings, whatever it is. Also, make sure to hit that thumbs up button as it helps me out immensely by getting my channel out there, and subscribe to the channel if you aren't already for more movie-related content on a near daily basis. But now, let's get to the 10 best superhero movies never made. At number 10 is Kevin Smith's Green Hornet. While this isn't the first unrealized superhero project of Kevin Smith's, more on that later, he was approached to write and direct an adaptation of the character in 2004. While he wasn't intent on trying his hand at writing a superhero movie after his previous efforts, he stated he was a fan of the character and noted he was willing to do it because, unlike more well-known superheroes where there was a huge lore surrounding them with dedicated fan bases, he said, quote, "Here, there is a simplicity to the character and the situation," unquote. With Smith's love of comic books seen on display throughout his career, as well as his personal enjoyment of the character, it would have made him a fun fit for the movie. Smith had written about 100 pages of his screenplay and approached Jake Gyllenhaal about playing the titled character. But 2004 was also the same year as his first non-View Askew-universe film, Jersey Girl, was released. Receiving mixed critical reception and underperforming at the box office, it caused Smith's Green Hornet film to get cancelled. We eventually got a Green Hornet movie in 2011 starring Seth Rogen and directed by Michel Gondry. However, it wasn't so great.
Why is that stupid? That's not stupid. Bloodnofsky.
Smith's project eventually came to fruition, but through a different medium. In 2010, he wrote a Green Hornet comic book series based on his screenplay for Dynamite Entertainment, which ran for 10 issues. He also co-wrote a separate series crossing over with the 1960s iteration of Batman, titled Batman 66 Meets the Green Hornet, which itself ran for 6 issues in 2014. But it's been most recently announced that he's also working on an animated series of the Green Hornet, though it currently is yet to be picked up by any network. Only time will tell to see how it goes. At number 9 is Wes Craven's Doctor Strange. Long before Benedict Cumberbatch stepped into the role in 2016, there were attempts to bring Doctor Strange to the big screen as far back as the 1980s. The first attempt was by Back to the Future screenwriter Bob Gale, who completed the script in 1986. The screenplay did its rounds, but it never made it into production. Film rights to Doctor Strange were then later briefly held by filmmaker Charles Band of B-movie company Full Moon Entertainment, but before he could get production off the ground, the rights expired. So he instead reworked the script to remove the Doctor Strange references and instead created a new character with some similar powers called Dr. Mordrid, which was released in 1992. The release of Dr. Mordrid refueled Marvel's desire to get a Doctor Strange movie off the ground, and in comes Wes Craven to write and direct, with an anticipated release date either in 1994 or 1995. Though, production simply never got off the ground for this either, and the film changed hands yet again, with the likes of David Goyer, Neil Gaiman, and Guillermo del Toro writing scripts and pitching ideas for Doctor Strange, though none of them ever seeing fruition, until Strange eventually made his big screen debut in his solo 2016 film, directed by Scott Derrickson.
What's this, my mantra? The Wi-Fi password.
While little is known about what Craven's project would entail, and he wound up being just one of a number of filmmakers who was simply briefly attached to the project, I think his version would have been the most intriguing. With his extensive history almost exclusively in horror, along with Strange providing some mind-bending imagery, having the two combined could have possibly given the superhero a unique horror edge to go along with some of the bizarre, trippy imagery he's known for. Craven never elaborated on what he had in mind, and with his passing in 2015, unfortunately we'll never get to know. At number 8 is George Miller's Justice League Mortal. In 2007, Warner Bros. Was looking to get a jump start on the Justice League, trying to get a screenplay fast-tracked before the Writers Guild strike of later that year. Husband and wife duo Kieran and Michelle Moroney wrote the screenplay, and after the initial choice to direct, Jason Reitman, turned them down, George Miller signed on to helm the project. Titled Justice League Mortal, the film would have been totally separate from the Dark Knight trilogy, as well as the 2006 film Superman Returns, with neither Christian Bale nor Brandon Routh asked to reprise their roles for this. DJ Catrona was instead cast as Superman and Armie Hammer as Batman, with Megan Gale cast as Wonder Woman, Adam Brody as The Flash, Common as the Jon Stewart iteration of Green Lantern, Teresa Palmer as Talia al Ghul, and Jay Baruchel as lead villain Maxwell Lord. Filming was to take place primarily in Australia, but the aforementioned Writers Guild strike put the film on hold. Once the strike ended, the film experienced multiple production delays, including being denied a tax rebate by the Australian government, pushing production late into 2008. By this point, The Dark Knight was released, and DC decided their focus was better suited on individual films and canceled the project. While much of the cast isn't filled with actors who immediately come to mind when thinking about the Justice League, Miller's high-energy, almost chaotic style, as seen in his Mad Max movies, would have made for an interesting spin on the group. While it's unfortunate we won't get to see his take on the characters, at least it gave him time to focus on more important things, like Happy Feet 2, of course.
I hate these long-distance relationships!
At number 7 is Guillermo del Toro's Justice League Dark. In 2012, it was reported Guillermo del Toro was working on a feature adaptation of the Justice League Dark, a relatively newer superhero team DC introduced in their comics the year prior, starring some of their more supernatural heroes like John Constantine, Swamp Thing, Zatanna, and Deadman, all of whom would also be part of del Toro's film. Over the next year, del Toro would regularly give fans updates on the project, though constantly changing who was part of the group. While Constantine, Swamp Thing, Zatanna, and Deadman remained consistent through each of the lineup changes, other characters who would get swapped in and out also included the Spectre, Madame Xanadu, Etrigan the Demon, and Zatanna's father, Zatara, none of whom have been featured in a live-action film before. At this point, the DCEU just started to get underway, though it was established this would be in its own continuity. While del Toro is known for overcommitting to projects, this actually wasn't one of them, as he handed in a completed script to Warner Bros. In 2014 with the intention of directing the film. However, DC simply didn't use it, delaying the project altogether, and as a result, del Toro left. However, he did come back as a producer when DC reignited talks of getting a film off the ground, now with Doug Liman directing and Michael Giglio writing, using del Toro's script as the basis for his own. Although this fizzled out as well. While as of now it's been reported that Warner Bros. Is working on both a Justice League Dark TV series and film, it would have been nice to see what del Toro would have brought to the project, as his affinity for the macabre would have been a nice fit when bringing to life characters with eerier backgrounds like Constantine and Deadman. There's still always a chance DC brings him back in some capacity for one of these newer projects, but as of now, it doesn't seem all that likely, especially with del Toro already having a lot lined up as it is. At number 6 is David Goyer's Green Arrow Escape from Supermax. In 2008, it was announced David Goyer would be directing a Green Arrow movie from a script he co-wrote with Justin Marks, who would later go on to write the live-action Jungle Book remake for Disney. Titled Green Arrow Escape from Supermax, this wouldn't be an origin story, but rather, the plot would consist of an already established Green Arrow being framed for a crime he didn't commit, and getting locked in a high-security prison similar to Alcatraz, trying to escape, with the catch being that it was filled with a lot of DC's A, B, and C-list supervillains. Green Arrow, a relatively unknown hero at the time, would not have been the biggest name in his own film, as it was reported the Joker, Lex Luthor, and the Riddler were all set to make appearances, among many other villains. While Goyer was optimistic the project would get made, as he stated in multiple interviews that Warner Bros. Did like the script, it was also the same year that The Dark Knight was released to massive success. Meanwhile, Marvel had just released Iron Man to their own success, so DC took a step back to reevaluate their projects moving forward. This essentially suffered a similar fate as George Miller's Justice League movie, which was also looking to start filming around this time. While an official reason was never given, Goyer stated in a 2015 interview that the Warner Bros. Executives felt their best path to compete with Marvel were solo movies, mainly Batman and Superman. While never officially cancelled, Green Arrow Escape from Supermax simply never came to be. Though elements can be found in the 7th season of the CW show Arrow, in which Oliver Queen was locked in a maximum security prison trying to escape. While it's unlikely the project will ever be revived, the thought of seeing a fast-paced, high-energy escape film featuring all of DC's most notable villains would have been exciting.
You failed this city.
At number 5 is Tim Burton's Superman Lives. This is probably the most famous of all these projects, even getting its own documentary in 2015, so this will be an oversimplified version of the story. Stemming from the success of the famous comic book storyline The Death of Superman, Kevin Smith pitched the story outline in 1996 to producer John Peters, who was hired to develop a new Superman movie. Peters agreed, but forced Smith to include certain elements like not having Superman fly and having him fight a giant spider. The script involved Brainiac sending Doomsday to kill Superman, partially by blocking out the sun to make him powerless. Brainiac teams up with Lex Luthor, but Superman is resurrected by a Kryptonian robot known as the Eradicator, which gives him a robotic suit to help defeat Brainiac. Robert Rodriguez was initially offered to direct but had to decline due to scheduling conflicts, so Tim Burton was hired instead. Nicolas Cage was then hired to portray Superman, believing he could, quote, reconceive the character, unquote. That would have been an understatement. Meanwhile, other casting choices included Christopher Walken as Brainiac and Chris Rock as Jimmy Olsen. Michael Keaton was also involved in some capacity, but it was never confirmed if he was reprising his role as Batman from the 1989 Tim Burton film. Burton then brought in Wesley Strick, who wrote the Cape Fear remake, to rewrite Smith's screenplay, removing the Eradicator and instead having Superman resurrected by the power of K, or the Force representing Krypton. However, this was deemed too expensive, and as filming was just about to begin, the dates were pushed back, though Cage had already most famously attended a costume fitting. In comes Dan Gilroy, who was hired to rewrite the screenplay and make it more economically feasible. Despite this, the studio was now hesitant to go through with the film. They stalled for over a year, causing Burton to leave the project in 1998, followed by Cage in 2000 after more rewrites were called for. Of all the entries on this list, given all the people involved, this certainly goes down as the strangest entry, and it's unknown how cohesive it truly would have been had production gone underway. But at the very least, it would have been interesting. Though, it's worth noting, Cage eventually got to voice Superman in the animated movie Teen Titans Go to the Movies. Maybe one day we'll see him voice the character for his own animated film as well.
Well, has there been a movie about you?
So many, and more to come.
At number 4 is Darren Aronofsky's Batman Year One. Following the poor critical and financial reception of 1997's Batman and Robin, Warner Bros. Scrapped the sequel and looked for ways to reboot the franchise. A number of potential projects were thrown around, but one of the earliest was a proposed adaptation of Frank Miller's Batman Year One comic book storyline, an origin story that established the tone of Gotham City being much darker and more realistic across all mediums. While Schumacher expressed interest in returning to the Batman franchise, Warner Bros. Instead brought in Darren Aronofsky to direct the film, as well as co-write the screenplay with Miller. As opposed to the campier Schumacher movies, Aronofsky's film would have taken inspiration from gritty 70s dramas such as Death Wish and The French Connection, and would have been R-rated, filled with a brooding Batman and much more realistic violence. Aronofsky also made several key changes that made it differ from the original comic book storyline. The project never saw the light of day for a number of reasons. One was the fact that Warner Bros. Wanted Freddie Prinze Jr. as Batman, while Aronofsky wanted Joaquin Phoenix. And while R-rated superhero movies are popular now, back then, it was considered a huge risk, and Warner Brothers wanted a version of Batman that kids would still be able to watch.
What killed the dinosaurs? The Ice Age! The Iceman cometh. Stay cool, bird boy.
When it was realized that Aronofsky and Warner Brothers had two totally opposite visions for the character, the studio abandoned the project and instead pursued other potential adaptations, eventually bringing in Christopher Nolan and David Goyer to write the script for Batman Begins. While Nolan and Goyer borrowed elements from Year One, and the Dark Knight trilogy went on to inspire a ton of darker and grittier blockbusters, Aronofsky's vision would have been wholly unique, with its own potential of changing the superhero landscape, which itself still wasn't a guaranteed box office success at the time. With his penchant for dark and gritty, yet compelling emotional drama, as seen in films like Requiem for a Dream and The Wrestler, it would have made him an ideal fit for the character, and with clear inspiration from classic 70s films, it would have also been any film buff's dream come true. At number 3 is James Cameron's SpiderMan. Talks of a Spider-Man movie went back as far as the 1980s, with both Roger Corman and Tobe Hooper briefly linked to the project. By 1990, Carolco Pictures, who produced the first 3 Rambo movies as well as Terminator 2, bought the rights to Spider-Man, having received a 57-page scriptment, which combines elements of a treatment with a traditional screenplay, from James Cameron, who would have also directed. While Carolco was granted the rights through 1996, they ceased production on Spider-Man in 1992 due to financial and legal problems. The next few years saw a series of litigations over the project, with multiple companies stepping in to sue each other over it, including 20th Century Fox stepping in to stop Cameron from participating altogether, claiming he was exclusive to them as a director. Soon after, Carolco ended up dissolving, while the rights for Spider-Man eventually made their way to Sony, who gave us the many adaptations we know now. Cameron's version, which has since been leaked, was certainly intriguing though. The film would have included Spider-Man's origins, though it would have been a seemingly more adult-oriented version of the character. It included a heavy use of profanity, as well as a scene of Peter Parker and Mary Jane having sex on the Brooklyn Bridge. Cameron also even had a cast in mind, with Leonardo DiCaprio as Spider-Man, Maggie Smith as Aunt May, Robin Lively as Mary Jane, Arlie Ermey as J. Jonah Jameson, Lance Henriksen as Electro, Michael Biehn as Sandman, and Arnold Schwarzenegger as Dr. Octopus.
You serious?
With Avatar seeming to be the only thing that comes to mind these days when thinking of James Cameron, it's sometimes easy to forget that he also did really well with adult-oriented action movies. Considering many of his action films like Aliens and the Terminator movies have been groundbreaking, Who knows what kind of ground he also could have broke with superhero movies had this come to fruition.
He doesn't want to be famous, and I'll make him infamous.
At number 2 is Joe Carnahan's Daredevil. We all know about the underwhelming Fox film Daredevil in 2003, but did you know they attempted to reboot the character afterwards? While there was an interest from Jason Statham in 2008 to take over as Daredevil, Fox struggled to actually get a solid idea for a new film off the ground. It took them until 2010 to attempt to get the ball rolling, with the main issue being finding the right director for the job. David Slade, best known for directing Hard Candy and 30 Days of Night, was initially tapped to take on the project, but had to drop out due to scheduling conflicts. By 2012, Fox still hadn't found a replacement for Slade, and if they hadn't started filming a reboot by October of that year, the rights would go back to Marvel, who was well into the MCU by this point. They briefly met with Joe Carnahan, director of The Grey and Narc, who pitched a version of the character set in the 1970s. But Fox didn't go for it, and eventually gave up on the project, letting the rights revert back to Marvel. While fans were ecstatic over the news, given Fox's previous handling of the character, and it did lead to Marvel's successful but short-lived Netflix series Daredevil, one still can't help but wonder what could have been. Carnahan's knack for pulpy, brutal action movies would have made him a great fit for the character. And it turned out he didn't just have one movie in mind, but a whole trilogy mapped out in his head. In an interview with the now defunct website Movie Pilot, Carnahan stated he had in mind, quote, Daredevil 73, Daredevil 79, and Daredevil 85, where I was going to do a kind of cultural libretto and make the music of those eras a kind of thematic arc. So the first one would be classic rock, the second would be punk rock, and the third film would be new wave, unquote. And honestly, that would have been incredible, especially for anyone who's a fan of those genres of music, with myself being one of them. With a Daredevil movie yet to actually be made by Marvel, there's a small sliver of hope in me that maybe they'd tap Carnahan to direct the project, though I highly doubt it, given his original vision was also R-rated. But in the meantime, if you haven't seen the sizzle reel by now, look it up, as it gets you nothing but hyped for what could have possibly been.
Guess what? That's not heaven. I'm killing you. I'm killing you. That's the C train.
But at number 1 is Edgar Wright's Ant-Man, probably the most drawn out of all the conflicts listed here. Wright, along with co-writer Joe Cornish, had a treatment for Ant-Man done in 2003, long before Marvel was even thinking about the MCU. And by 2006, Marvel locked them in to co-write the film, with Wright directing. At that point, Wright, who is just known for Shaun of the Dead as well as his sitcom Spaced, made it clear his film would not be a spoof, but a straightforward action-adventure movie with some comedic elements. The plan was to include both Hank Pym and Scott Lang, and he compared the latter to being similar to an Elmore Leonard character. Over the next few years, the project would remain in a holding pattern as Wright worked on rewrites, and in the meantime, he focused his attention on what would be his next two films, Hot Fuzz and Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. He also wasn't pressured by Marvel to fast-track Ant-Man because the MCU had just started and they were prioritizing characters such as Thor and Captain America. By 2011, Wright's attention shifted back to Ant-Man, and by 2012, he shot a test reel which was positively received. Production was about to begin, with Paul Rudd and Michael Douglas being cast as Scott Lang and Hank Pym respectively, but tensions began arising between Wright and Marvel. Wright's film was created more as a standalone project, with a tone that was similar to his own movies, while Marvel gave him notes requesting that the film play into the larger MCU vision, while also asking to keep the tone more consistent with their previous films. While Wright tried addressing the notes with further rewrites, it still wasn't to their liking, and they looked into rewriting the film with their own in-house writers. Not wanting to be a director for hire, Wright left the project in 2014, stating, quote, I wanted to make a Marvel movie, but I don't think they really wanted to make an Edgar Wright movie, unquote. Most of Wright's crew left with him. Marvel then brought in Adam McKay and Peyton Reed to rewrite the film, with Reed taking over as director, to ultimately use Wright's story as the basis for their film, though aligning a lot of the details with what Marvel was looking for, especially changing much of the dialogue.
You are my bestest friend.
What is that thing?
He's so ugly!
Ant-Man wound up being a success, and while Wright and Cornish still received screenplay credit alongside Reed and McKay, and it was their ideas that were used as the basis for the general storyline, it goes without saying that had Wright made the movie that was unique to his voice, we would have gotten a totally different film, with his tendency for eccentric humor, distinct visual cues, and pop culture spoofs. Wright recently stated he reconnected with Kevin Feige after a 6-year rift over the Ant-Man debacle, and while it's unknown if we'll ever get an Edgar Wright movie within the MCU, the door has at least certainly reopened for the possibility. So, that's my list. This is obviously not a comprehensive look of all the superhero movies that we never got to see, as there are still tons of projects that never got to see the light of day. There were a lot of casting choices and directorial choices that certainly would have been interesting, some of which can possibly still happen down the line, but Who knows? Let me know if you enjoyed this list, as I normally don't do what-if style lists, but this was fun to make. I can certainly do it again with other genres, other filmmakers, roles actors turned down, but let me know if more of these would interest you. But in the meantime, which superhero movies that didn't happen would you like to see happen? Did you have any specific fan castings? Any filmmakers you'd like to see get into the superhero world? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching, everyone, and keep having fun with film.